very warm welcome to everyone, and you are watching Maker FM. Everyone deserves to get the best quality of learning no matter where they are in the world. It is much harder to make that a reality though, but maybe there's a key role that universities can play in shaping future forward minds in India. Could the creation of maker spaces within India's universities make that happen? Something might not necessarily materialize if students breeze through college without ever building something real, something raw, messy, and uncertain sometimes that might break or fall apart. But in the end, that is actually what matters. It might actually teach students something more than any theoretical lecture ever would. Sure, India has perfected the art of teaching students to answer questions. But what does it really take them to teach them to ask better questions, follow ups, explore the untapped areas where no one thought to know at a time when people might be sleepwalking through life? What does it really take to revive their brains and get people to be curious again? Would learning be even richer when disciplines collide? What kind of mindsets helps India thrive? To break it all down, please help me welcome Professor Pratik Mutha, Associate Professor and Dean of Institutional Advancement at IIT Gandhinagar. I'm also happy to add that Professor Mutha is the coordinator of the Maker Spaces, an initiative brought together by the Maker Bhavan Foundation. Professor Mutha, it's my sheer pleasure and privilege to have you at the Maker FM podcast. It could be perhaps be a good idea to begin this conversation if you could give a sneak peek to our listeners about your life at IIT Gandhinagar.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me on this podcast. It's a pleasure to be talking to you. Um, I just briefly introduce myself too. My background is in engineering, but over time I got interested in biology and moved towards neuroscience. Um, I worked with patients with brain damage for a while I was in the US, and then moved back to IIT Gandhinagar to start my own lab. uh, I have now students and postdocs and so on. And our research is centered around trying to understand how the brain controls movement in humans, which then has implications in robotics, in rehabilitation, in sports, in the performing arts, and so on. At IIT Gandhinagar, so that's one part of what I do. The other part has to do with this additional position that I have, which is the institutional advancement work. So here we work with donors, individuals, donors, as well as corporations to build new partnerships, to develop new ideas, um, to look at new programs, and to then do some fundraising to support those programs. So in that sense, a lot of what I do is sort of an outward looking role here at IIT Gandhinagar, where we're working with multiple people, both at an individual level, at a corporate level, and so on. I'm also on the board of the IIT Gandhinagar Research Park, which is a separate Section 8 company of the Institute, promoted by the Institute, and also the Innovation and Incubation Center, which is another Section 8 company promoted by IIT Gandhinagar. So there's multiple sort of roles that I've been fortunate to play here, which have led to my own professional as well as personal growth.
That sounds so fascinating, Professor. If you could perhaps spend some more time talking a little about, particularly the Maker Spaces initiative, what is possibly the picture that one can paint visualizing it?
Yeah, I can answer that. So there's it's an interesting way in which we began. So the Maker Bhavan Foundation was interested in setting up tinkering labs at a number of institutions. They had set one up at IIT Bombay, and they were in the process of discussing um, with other institutions on the establishment of tinkering labs. Um, So we were approached by them, and at that time, I was the dean of academics. I happened to be the dean of academics at the institute, and we internally were having a conversation about a shift in pedagogy, about how we wanted to run our courses, about what we wished our students learn. This move away from just a textbook culture, and this emphasis on theory versus hands-on experimentation. We wanted to bring in project-based learning and so on. And so this match sort of between what the Maker Bhavan Foundation intended to do and what we were thinking sort of early on back then was sort of perfect, right? And so the Maker Bhavan Foundation was very keen on supporting us. They supported us to set up not just the tinkering lab, but a much larger maker space that we, in fact, happen to call Maker Bhavan here. Um, now, when this partnership was sort of being evolved, we realized that there's not any model maker spaces that we can go to in India and look at what they've been doing and learn from them. So, in fact, the Maker Bhavan Foundation was kind enough to support the travel of some of us from here, from IIT Gandhinagar to the US, to look at really the best maker spaces uh, that they had. So we went to Carnegie Mellon, we went to MIT, we went to Stanford, we went to Berkeley, and looked at how these maker spaces are set up, how they are run, how they are managed, how they engage students, how they are integrated within the academic curriculum, and so on. And then brought all that learning back to IIT Gandhinagar, and then created this large now making ecosystem. Just to give you a picture, we have cutting edge equipment for digital fabrication, 3D printers, laser cutters. We have a bunch of mechanical equipment. We have CNCs and so on. And we currently have about 10,000 square feet dedicated to making, right? Which for our size is quite substantial. So, just to give you a sense, we are slightly less than 3,000 students, about half of which are undergrads.
Yeah.
And so having 10,000 square feet of just dedicated space for making and tinkering is a huge deal. Uh, and over the course of our conversation, I'll also tell you how we've been able to integrate this into our academic framework too.
Incredible, Professor. So basically, the intention was to build an institution which is world class, to have professors like you, the talent like you, and to actually see how it is done and perhaps replicate and invite some of the best practices here. I have to ask you this, that you're also somebody who has studied both in the US and India. So, how exactly are you sort of looking at this relationship which most universities in India have, which is to deal with real world problem solving? You think is that element, can you say really realistically, sort of missing in India?
Yeah, great question. When I went to the US to study, one of the things that struck me actually, and right away, was how easily people, without any sort of even formal engineering training, were able to build things, right? So, like I said, I studied neuroscience, but my advisor, who had a PhD in neuroscience, was able to just build rigs for the lab with his own hands right away. Similarly, we had a programming course taught by a psychology professor. So these kinds of, examples really struck me, right? And I sort of reflected back on my own education in India, and I've sort of thought about this for a while after coming back and after being engaged now on some of these initiatives here, is that the big difference, right, in terms of the education that we provide to our students in India versus what happens in other places around the world, in the West particularly, is that we tend to emphasize a lot of theory, right? So we have excellent theoretical rigor. We've made a lot of progress on that, but our engagement with real world problem solving is actually quite uneven, right? It's quite low. And then it's starting to change. It is improving, but we really don't have a big element of, let's say, project oriented learning or hands on tinkering, or even industry engagement for that matter, where industry could then, for instance, give real world problems for students to solve. Um, so many universities, many colleges, and many schools, in fact, right, what they prioritize is this exam centric model, right? And I talked about this textbook culture, right? Where the questions are, so solve this particular problem and there's a fixed answer to it. There's really no room for any deviations, from a fixed sort of way of thought. So I think we're still in that mode, right? Things are starting to change. There will be pockets that emerge, and I think over time we will see this model expand. For example, at IIT Gandhinagar, I already told you what we are doing, but we see a lot of this kind of a pedagogy coming into, for example, academics at IIT Delhi, at IIT Bombay, and so on. So we see this emerging, and I think what will happen is once the IITs make it mainstream, then a lot of colleges will start adopting, what they see the IITs doing, right? So I think it'll come. It is slow, because it's a lot of work, right? So that's, you also asked about sort of impediments, right? What's holding us back? One is this, right? Our curricula tend to be very rigid. We don't usually update them to reflect, societal needs, for example. We don't tend to update them to reflect what the industry needs, for example, right? We also operate a lot in silos, right? The physics person rarely talks to a humanities person. The humanities person rarely talks to a maths person, right? So this kind of siloed thinking is also, I think, holding us back from addressing problems that require this, cross-disciplinary thinking. So I think that's another impediment, right?
That's a great segue to my next question in talking about multidisciplinary approach, because there could be temptations to be relegated to your own silos, to what you specialize in. Suppose, for example, you begin as an engineer, but then you took to biology in a very big way in your life. That we just mentioned that Shrija, you began your career as an engineer. So that is your interest, right? A multidisciplinary approach. So I have to ask you, Professor, so when someone has spent, say, a lot of time, say, in exploring physics, what do you think can be done to get them to, say, care more deeply about solving social problems or moving across disciplines to add more context to why they do what they do?
I think there's a lot that can be done, right? One is, I think the most important thing is from a very early sort of academic stage from the schools, right? We've got to expose students to how specialized knowledge actually needs to intersect with societal needs, right? So we emphasize this technical bit, in our engineering education, but hardly ever does that intersect with what society might need, right? So we need to, for example, embed these contextual modules into the coursework. We need to bring that in. For example, you might have a physicist who's extremely good at quantum technology, right? But then has that physicist thought about how quantum technology could be used, for example, in renewable energy, right? So unless we build that kind of an exposure and that kind of a thinking into our academic curriculum, we will lag behind. I think that element of, what problem are you going to solve rather than what, theory you are going to learn. That distinction needs to be made. We also need to, I think, in some ways, encourage co-teaching by faculty, right? So an engineering professor could come together with a humanities professor and design a course, right? In fact, we at IIT Gandhinagar had a really nice course called Engineering and Democracy, right? So things of that nature,
Wow.
right? Yes, you're building products, right? But who are you building them for? right? And have you taken that into perspective, right? So we can encourage that kind of co-teaching by faculty. We can mandate cross-disciplinary projects. We can incentivize, uh, you know, people coming together to solve a bigger problem than just one siloed sort of thing that they might otherwise do.
Professor, such a beautiful sentence. I actually wrote this in my diary. Specialized knowledge has to speak with society. It can't be in silos. So, like you basically said, gave the example that quantum technology, a great physicist, but perhaps can do something on the renewable energy side. So, the classroom teaching has to speak to the outside world. It really can't be just relegated to just the classroom. So, quite possibly, there could be students who are brilliant on paper, like you sort of alluded to, brilliant quantum physicists, but perhaps they might not necessarily know how to collaborate with other people, or perhaps how to persist when things don't go their way and don't have the courage to fail, or just ultimately failure is the path to success. So, do you really have the persistence or the patience to deal with failure? So, what do you think could realistically be done to grow like a builder culture or a builder mindset in India in 2025 and beyond, and not just to be an achiever on paper?
Great question. Again, I think um, we need to create what could be called, let's say, failure positive environments, right? So where a student starts on a particular project, let's say, right, but is not able to finish it, these students need not be penalized for it, right? Because the way we currently do things, it is, you're asked to do a project. If that project works, you get a certain grade. If it doesn't get, if it doesn't work, you fail, right? And what I'm trying to say is that, if we create this failure positive environment, maybe we start looking at the effort put in. Maybe we look at what stage the person has reached, and even if the little bit, the last bit is incomplete, right, we still encourage that student to take it forward, and not in some way hold them back, right? So that's one way, I think. They can learn from their mistakes. Even if the project has failed, they can pivot and so on, right? I think the other important thing is we need to build these cross-disciplinary teams, right? I don't think that working in silos, I'm sort of going back to the previous question, which I think is related, right? We could sort of force, students from two or three disciplines to come together and then start, working on a project, right? So again, sort of cultivating that mindset that you're trying to solve a larger problem than you know uh, just you're getting a certain grade by showing a certain output. And the last thing, I think, is also soft skills training. I think that's very, very important. I think we need to train students on how to communicate, how to resolve conflicts, how to lead, ethics, business, law. We need to create all of those sort of additional um, structures and modules in the academic curriculum to enable students to to really get the full picture of how a product is made and what needs to be done to make it successful in the real world.
Well, I'm just taking down notes copiously like a student listening to a professor. Is so beautifully explaining that you have to keep going back to the drawing board and iterate again and again. And I just love this terminology, failure positive environment. You have just clubbed two words together, that failure positive environments have to be nurtured, cross disciplinary approach, soft skills training. But, Professor, I have to ask you that how realistic it is. I mean, how open students are to this kind of mindset.
It's hard. It's not easy. One is because it's a lot of effort, because you almost have to work with an individual student to identify their shortcomings or where they might be needing help, and then work on those, right? Somebody who's good at communication but is a poor leader and has bad ethics cannot be treated the same way as somebody who's very ethical, who's doing things the right way but just cannot communicate. So I think a lot of effort is needed. It is not easy, and oftentimes in India we are held back because of a volume problem, right? That we have really large numbers, we have large undergraduate batch sizes, and so on. And but we still need to try, right? We still need to try. We need to break classes down into smaller groups. Maybe that's one way to go. Maybe we need to incentivize faculty the right way. One thing that we did at IIT Gandhinagar, for example, when we were building the makerspace to get over that hump of, how are we going to get the faculty to come and teach here, right? Or to modify their courses, is we got instructional designers, we got external help, we worked with the faculty and we really sat down and said, look, show us your syllabus and we will help you modify it, redesign it, and pivot it to be taught through a hands-on, an active sort of format, right? So we put in that effort sort of administratively and encourage faculty, and faculty were aligned. Once they saw the value in doing that, they were aligned and they took on the challenge, did put in that extra effort, and now we have nearly 10 courses running through our makerspace. And these were like, let's say, heat and mass transfer, right? Which is very mathematical, which requires blackboard. Traditionally, that's how it's been done, and so on. But now we have colleagues who are running these courses entirely from the makerspace. So through in a very hands-on and in project-oriented manner. So I think if we incentivize faculty the right way, if we encourage them the right way, if we provide the support, that will then percolate down to the students. See, the students are hungry to learn. The students want to learn, and the students are motivated to do things, right? Once we have the faculty on board, right, they know how to get the best out of the students. So I think it'll percolate down to the students once we get the faculty to do the right thing.
So, Professor, I have to ask you, this entire concept of maker spaces and what you as an organization at IIT Gandhinagar have set out to do in building a maker space is a world-class institution. So how do you measure success? What is a successful maker space? Are there parameters on which you gauge the success?
Yeah, I mean, see, again, it is perhaps not grades, right? Grades are important. I'm not discounting grades. But often, at IIT Gandhinagar, informally, we've said that just like we have a transcript, we should have a skill print, right? I mean, and this is a term that is not original. I have not coined it. But this term skill print came from a Stanford University design project, actually. So some of your viewers can look up stanford2025.com. This was an exercise that the Stanford Design School did on reimagining academics, in 2025. So, and this was a while back. So they were projecting into the future almost. Uh, but really, what this skill print would contain is what are the projects you've done, what have you built, what problems have you solved, where have you failed, what could have done better, and so on. And if I was an employer, right, I would look at not just your transcript, but I would also look at that skill print. And I'd say, okay, here's a successful student, right, who's done 4 different projects that have been endorsed by the faculty, who, and they've got rewarded for it in the sense of credit, right? So they've gotten credit for it. It mattered for their graduation, so they put in the work. Um, and I think that is somebody who I would consider successful. I mean, it's not going to be, just the grades or just the making at the expense of the grades. I think if you have a nice blend of both, I think that's how we should start measuring success. I keep going back to faculty. So this is what I would also do, right? Is on the faculty side, also I would look at, somebody who's successful as, okay, here's somebody who's done great work, published, great studies in great journals, but also somebody else who might have actually solved an industry specific problem, right? Who's generated IP, who has generated, who's translated technologies from the lab. So if let's say faculty promotions, faculty growth, are all based on or consider those parameters as well, that would then count as faculty being successful also, and more people would then be encouraged to take that route rather than just the publication route.
That is so well put, and I would definitely look up on this terminology, Stanford Design University thinking that you spoke about. It really sounds like a marvelous initiative. But what you mentioned, that just creating a space is not enough for maker spaces. It really is about the programming, keeping the enthusiasm of students as well as teachers going. How do you keep them engaged? Because perhaps some of the things can lose steam after graduation and the entire focus gets shifted to about getting into jobs. So maybe it's burnout, career anxiety, there could be personal reasons. What do you think a university or even the persons themselves could do to keep their minds nourished, intellectually alive, curious, and more importantly, experiential?
No, you get both, right? You get both types of people, and I think having both is important, right? So you get the nerd and and the engineer who's built things, and is a tinkerer, to the core, right? And they can advise on the technical bits, right? But you also need the person who is a marketer, who understands business, who can sell things, can sort of engage with students on, here's what you might want to say when you go to pitch your product, and here's what you should avoid saying when you pitch your product. Both are needed. um, do we do that? Yes, we do. We get entrepreneurs here for the short and the long term, depending on how long they are available. There's a lot of flexibility in how we do things, here, particularly at IIT Gandhinagar. So, yeah, we get all kinds of people. We're a very open institute, and our students get to interact with a large number of successful individuals from all around the world, in fact.
I have to ask you this. You spoke about the skill based learning competencies, skill based learning education. How do you make yourself more employable with this entire advent of generative AI and the kind of sort of sheer amount of job insecurity that people are sitting on, especially say, in the fields of engineering? There's sort of very low coding jobs also being outsourced generative AI at a time when you're dealing with so much insecurity with the advent of generative AI. Where do you think this entire narrative about maker spaces has become a difficult sell or an easy sell?
Um, uh, Again, I think the it's not cheap to build a makerspace. It costs money. Um, we've been fortunate that we've had the support of Maker Bhavan Foundation and other well-wishers who've supported this initiative in a big way. Um, the uh, the other sort of aspect is, it's not enough to just build it and then assume that people will come just because there is equipment. Like I said before, there has to be an active movement, right, of getting faculty enthused about using spaces of that kind, and demonstrating impact, that the kind of spaces that I mean, the impact that these kinds of spaces can create. I think a big sort of thing is also how well you can integrate active learning and that kind of pedagogy into your academic framework, right? So what we've been able to do fairly successfully here is create two courses that are required of every single undergraduate student that comes in to IIT Gandhinagar. One is called Design, Innovation and Prototyping, and the second one is called The World of Engineering. Now, pretty much the entire first year, the students are in the makerspace making things and also learning different trades, right? So that took a while for us to sort of work with people, work with faculty, and encourage them to buy into teaching it, right? I mean, it's not enough to just build a space that nobody uses. So you have to, instruction has to happen and so on. We really have to make these spaces cultural landmarks, right? Um, we have to bring faculty ownership and leadership. I think these were sort of the initial set of challenges for us as we were doing that? How do you align the curriculum? How do you ensure that you're not moving too many things at the same time because you want to fit this in? um, what kind of incentives are you going to provide? How do you manage the resources? How do you expand, right? I mean, you build something, but the fact student strength is going to keep growing, the faculty strength is going to keep growing. What is the long term sort of plan for sustaining this movement? These are the things that we tried to work on, and we've been fairly successful, I would say, in getting this going here at IIT Gandhinagar, and we have a plan, right? We have a plan about how we're going to grow this, how we're going to sustain it. These days there's a word that goes around quite a bit, which is called upskilling, right? And I've always been confused by this word, But anyway, I mean, I think in a broad sense, right? We've got to keep universities, institutions need to keep their doors open for students to go in and out, right? So we again at IIT Gandhinagar have created ways where a student could get out, come back, get out, come back, get out, come back, so that and this is while they are pursuing their degree too, right? Of course, beyond their degrees, our doors are always open for our alumni and so on. But I think the way learning can be enhanced, for students is, let's say they learn something, go and work at an industry for some time, come back, learn something more, go out maybe for a couple of years, and then say, oh, I want to come back, finish my degree now. And we should create those mechanisms, right? Because I think more and more this idea that, oh, I'm in an undergraduate program and I need to finish it in 4 years, we'll see that also fading. It's going to take a very, very long time. But I do feel that we're going to see a lot of this in and out and in and out that students will start doing, because there's opportunities opening up at all skill levels, right? That's one. The second thing that is happening, and the government is also pushing this in a big way, is the development of what is called a competency based education. Right? So where instead of learning theory, right, you actually learn some skills so that you are more employable as such, right? So I think if we can bring that element in also, it'll keep students engaged, right? And it'll keep alumni engaged. We could create alumni, for instance, innovation networks for collaborative projects. Alumni could come in and offer some projects for students to work on. So there's a way for the alumni also to remain engaged with the institute, and remain engaged with the most current sort of thing going on in academia, right? You could have alumni come and give talks. You could have students go and work in their industries, their startups. There are these what is called lifelong learning portals that are springing up now. You can sign up for a course at any time. Maybe universities could look at offering some of those. There's professional communities. You can carve out time for passion projects. There's many ideas there. But you're right that we need to find ways to get people out of the usual rut, right? That one could get into with a professional life, or just working at a particular institution or a company for several years. There's ways that can be done that I just mentioned. AI is here to stay. There's no way we can avoid it, right? And it's going to penetrate deeper and deeper. And I think we are already seeing sort of the first level of, let's say, customer interface, right, or service interface, is now through generative AI. I can barely talk to a person when I call customer service, and I'm getting answers from this AI chatbot, really. And this, I think, is going to penetrate, right? So we will see a churn. We will certainly see a churn in terms of the kinds of jobs that are out there, in terms of the possibilities that are out there. I think if students, you know, keep an open mind and are um, and figure out how to keep learning, right, new things, how to keep learning new skills, how to pivot to a new opportunity, how to build on their past work and their past experience to do something new. I think we will be able to sort of ride that wave, right? So it's called learning to learn, right? So if as a student you learn how to learn, right? I don't think there will be too many problems, sort of, in the future that person. I think that will have somebody who fails to do that could, get sort of usurped by this AI tsunami, right? That is coming. So I think it's important to to sort of get breadth very early on, instead of just one narrow specialization. And that having that breadth is then going to enable you to move, comfortably between areas, right?
Professor, that's a lovely conversation, but I have to conclude by asking this to you that you use the word AI tsunami, and very rightly so. So, how about professors like you, innovators like you, people who are building such formidable education institutions, such well read people? How often does AI come into your conversations, in your meetings or boardrooms, like you just said? How do you tackle with this AI tsunami, and how are you thinking of tackling this, especially in the world of education?
It's too early to tell. It comes up during the conversations a lot, right? But most of these conversations are still centered around grading, and cheating and so on, right? There's something interesting that I did in my course that I just taught this semester. Um, and again, this is sort of based on my own reading and my own understanding that there's no way to escape this now, right? So for some assignments, what I ended up doing was the broad sort of framework was that students would have to read a research paper and summarize it and reflect on it and so on. But it is now very easy to just upload a paper into an AI tool and then get the gist out, right? So everybody would have done it. And so what I did was I said, use the AI tool. Right? I said, first write it in your own words, then keep refining your prompts for this AI tool, right? And get the gist out, right? The same length that you wrote, okay? And get the AI summary out, right? And then write a reflection piece comparing what you wrote with the AI. Right? And it works really well because now what the student is forced to do is think of where the AI is falling short, right? What has it missed, right? What has it made up? Where has it hallucinated? And where have you fallen short, right? Compared to what AI is telling you. So I think there's ways to effectively utilize these because, like I said, there's just no way to escape it.
That's a very smart assignment. It's literally like a AI versus human comparison, right? Professor, we really can't conclude this conversation with a quick rapid fire. If you have to give me the highest moment of being a professor and the lowest moment, what would that be?
I think I can't point to one, but I think the high point has to do with my research. We were working on a very, very hard problem, and we ended up being successful, and this paper ended up being a really good one. There's a lot of novel information out there, so I think so far I think that has been the high point. um, the low points, of course, are when experiments don't work, when you have to do a lot of convincing of to other people to try something new, to take risk, when there's a lot of conflicts that you need to resolve. I think those are the lows, but I think those also teach you something, right? So I think yeah, there's not too many of those though.
Okay, if you were to name one innovation in recent times which has impressed you, what would that be?
I think from an engineering perspective, the Neuralink brain electrodes are fantastic, right? The neuroscience aspect of it, we have known for a long time. But what Neuralink was able to do with the engineering side of this was just amazing. I mean, uh, these electrodes that they are able to implant in the brains of monkeys and people are really state of the art. So that I think is an engineering marvel.
Okay, what a lovely conversation, Professor. And so we might like to think of innovation as magic, but there's a major cultural component to it, as Professor alluded to, and that infusion of culture comes from the university campus that wants to take that extra step. There is that magic that is unleashed in an interdisciplinary environment. It is not necessarily a melting pot, but a salad bowl. Sure, India has hackathons, startup competitions, and maybe there's a role that these kind of organizations play in learning. Yet, India might still struggle to consistently produce innovators across cities and societies. So, how long before we see a real maker culture in India? Can we actually see a design system and mercy that would go beyond producing momentary sparks of learner brilliance and actually sustain that fire? What Professor Mutha alluded to, the design thinking and thinking of 2025 and beyond. So the question really is in front of us. What do we need to start measuring that we have never measured before? I'm leaving all of you with these questions that we have never perhaps thought about and to ponder upon, perhaps an assignment with the human AI comparison to reflect upon our skill set. Until next time I see you, goodbye and good luck. Professor Mutha, sheer pleasure and privilege to have you on the Maker FM podcast and such a lovely conversation. Thank you so much.